Wildlife trafficking is the fourth largest illegal trade in the world. It comes after drugs, after counterfeiting, after human trafficking, and before illegal arms dealing. Its estimated annual value runs between $15 and $23 billion, depending on methodology, source, and which commodities are included in the count. It operates on every inhabited continent. It uses the same shipping infrastructure, the same financial networks, the same corrupt official relationships, and many of the same criminal personnel as the drug trade. The difference is the commodity, living animals and parts and products derived from them. Tigers, rhinoceroses, elephants, pangolins, parrots, sea turtles, orchids, slow lorises, sun bears. The list encompasses thousands of species and the demand for them, for their body parts in traditional medicine, for their skins and ivory and shells as status objects, for their living bodies in the exotic pet trade, is distributed across wealthy consumer markets on multiple continents. The animals at the center of this trade are not renewable resources. They are individuals of species that, in many cases, are already on the edge of biological viability. Each individual removed from the wild population brings the species incrementally closer to extinction. The structure of the wildlife trafficking network is, at its most sophisticated level, indistinguishable from the organizational model of any mature transnational organized crime operation. At the source end, in the forests and savannas and coral reefs where the animals live, the work is done by local operators, poachers in the conventional terminology, who are typically from economically marginal communities in source countries and who receive a small fraction of the commodity's ultimate market value. A rhinoceros horn that commands $100,000 per kilogram in a final market in Vietnam or China might be purchased from the poacher who shot the animal for a few hundred or a few $1,000s. Between the poacher and the final consumer, the product passes through multiple layers of handlers, each adding value through proximity to the market, through the provision of documentation, through transportation logistics, and through the corruption of official systems required to move a prohibited commodity across international borders. At the middle levels, the trade is managed by organizations with the resources to operate container shipping, to bribe customs officials and port inspectors, to produce falsified sites permits and veterinary certificates, and to maintain the encrypted communication channels that make coordination possible without generating evidence that law enforcement can intercept and use. At the destination end, the buyers are often affluent. Traditional medicine practitioners, collectors of exotic animals, consumers who associate rhinoceros horn or tiger bone with status or medical efficacy. The demand side of the trade exists in wealthy communities in China, Vietnam, Thailand, the Gulf states, parts of Europe, and the United States. The pangolin illustrates the scale and the logic of the trade with particular clarity. Pangolins are scaly, insectivorous mammals found across sub-Saharan Africa and South and Southeast Asia. They are the only mammals with scales, a unique adaptation that has, unfortunately, made them objects of intense commercial demand. Their scales are used in traditional Chinese medicine, based on claims about their efficacy for which there is no scientific evidence. Their meat is considered a delicacy in some markets. Pangolins are also extraordinarily ill-equipped, behaviorally, to resist poaching. Their primary defense against natural predators is to curl into a ball, making them trivially easy to collect by hand. They are nocturnal and slow-moving. They do not fight back. In the field, capturing a pangolin requires essentially no skill or equipment beyond finding one. The result is that pangolins are now considered the most trafficked wild mammal in the world by volume. Seizures alone, the proportion of the trade that is intercepted by enforcement, which researchers estimate at 5 to 10% of the total, have documented seizures of tens of thousands of individuals and many hundreds of metric tons of scales annually in recent years. One seizure in Malaysia in 2019 recovered approximately 33 metric tons of pangolin scales, representing the deaths of an estimated 54,000 pangolins. All 8 species of pangolin are now classified as threatened or critically endangered. The traffic continues. The exotic pet trade is the dimension of wildlife trafficking most visible to consumers in wealthy countries, and it has produced some of the most bizarre and logistically creative criminal adaptations in any illegal market. Live birds are smuggled by concealing them in hair curlers taped to a smuggler's body. Reptile eggs are carried in specially constructed undergarments that maintain temperature during flight. Live tortoises and small mammals are packed into suitcases with modified false bottoms. Primate infants, concealed in bags, are carried through airports by individuals dressed as pregnant women. Fish are transported in water-filled bags concealed in modified luggage. The exotic pet market in the United States, Europe, and increasingly in the Gulf states and China creates demand for animals ranging from small colorful parrots to large venomous snakes, from pygmy slow lorises to juvenile big cats. Social media has both stimulated demand. Viral videos of slow lorises being tickled generated enormous increases in demand for the animals as pets, before it became widely understood that the tickling response is actually a fear response, and that slow lorises captured for the pet trade have their teeth removed with wire cutters, and provided a distribution channel through which buyers and sellers make contact. The slow loris is, under this trade, one of the most harmed animals relative to its natural population size. It is also one of the clearest examples of the mechanism by which demand is generated and maintained through media exposure that presents the animals as adorable without context for the conditions under which they reach the market. Law enforcement efforts against wildlife trafficking face structural challenges that are familiar from the drug trade and have proven similarly resistant to solution. The profit margins are sufficient to absorb significant enforcement risk. The penalties in most source countries are insufficient to deter organized criminal participation. Fines lower than the value of a single seized shipment, prison terms measured in months rather than years, bail conditions that allow accused traffickers to return to business during prosecution. Corruption at border posts, ports, and customs agencies provides the operational pathways that keep the trade moving. Demand-side interventions, education campaigns aimed at reducing consumer purchasing of wildlife products, have had demonstrable effects in specific contexts. A sustained public awareness campaign in China targeting ivory consumption produced measurable shifts in stated attitudes and contributed to a decision by the Chinese government to ban domestic ivory trade in 2017. The ban appears to have reduced ivory consumption, though the black market adapted to shifting enforcement attention and the overall elephant poaching situation remains dire. The International Legal Framework, CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, provides the regulatory architecture for controlling wildlife trade across borders. But the effectiveness of CITES depends entirely on national enforcement capacity and political will, both of which vary enormously across the nearly 183 signatory nations. The wildlife trafficking crisis is, at its core, a story about the collision between ecological systems that evolved without human-scale commercial pressure and economic systems that generate demand for biological products at a scale those ecological systems cannot sustain. The rhinoceros has been on Earth for approximately 50 million years. It survived the mass extinction event that killed the non-avian dinosaurs. It survived multiple ice ages. It survived the emergence of early hominids in Africa and coexisted with human hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years. It may not survive the demand for a horn whose perceived medicinal properties are entirely fictional. This is not a problem of insufficient ecological complexity or insufficient animal adaptation. It is a problem of human demand and the criminal infrastructure that meets it. The biology is not the constraint. The market is.